Make sure I hit record. All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks, everyone, for coming. My name is Jerrell Mardis, and today I'm going to talk to you about the new AndroidX navigation framework. So before I get started, I want to give you a little bit of information about me. Like I said, my name is Jerrell. I've been developing apps for Android for roughly 10 years now. I'm an Android engineer at Salesforce. I'm also an organizer for the GG Chicago West. So we haven't had meetings in a while, but we're actually going to start that back up. So if you're out in the suburbs and you want to come to I know, Matt, you're smiling. It was a frequent visitor of to the meetup. But if you're out in the suburbs and you want to come out and check it out, just feel free to talk to me after this talk and give you some more information about it. And I'm also an organizer for Chicago Roboto. Chicago Roboto is an Android conference that we hold every year in April here in downtown. So if you go on chicagoroboto.com, you can check it out. We have the list of speakers and the schedule's out. So if you're interested in that, go check that out. All right. So actually, before we get started, who here has any experience with the navigation framework? Okay. Okay. So that's good. Who here has experience with Kotlin? Okay, good. Because all of the code that you see will be in Kotlin. So if you have any questions, feel free to just stop me and ask. So the first question I had when I started looking into this is, why is there another navigation framework? Why did Google create another one? There are a ton out there. If you go on GitHub, you'll see a ton of different libraries out there. What makes this one so special? So Google, seeing that they're becoming a little bit more opinionated with how they build things, and now they're recommending a single activity approach. So instead of having multiple activities, you have one main activity, or whatever your entry points are, that's the number of activities you'll have, and they'll use a navigation framework to swap in and out fragments. So what they want to do, they want to solve a few different pain points when dealing with fragments. So who here has dealt with fragments? Okay. Who here has experienced the pain of dealing with fragments? All right. So yeah. So it's not the greatest API to deal with in Android. So they sought out to try to fix some of the pain points. So let's see. What are some of the pain points? So the first, who here has seen this before? Right? Like, it's very obscure, like, what is going on? What do you mean I can't perform this action? What action am I performing, right? Usually this happens when you're clicking back on your app, you just get this random stack trace, which isn't helpful at all. One of the pain points is dealing with fragment transactions. It's very, very error prone. Depending on when you commit those transactions, you can lead into errors like this. Let's take a look at another example. So this example right here is actually starting an animation when you commit your fragment. So who here thinks that this code works?
It should.
It should?
Maybe.
It shouldn't work.
It should.
Who? Raise your hand if you think this code works. It's pretty straightforward, right? We're creating a fragment, we're adding it, we're setting the custom animation, and we're committing it, right? It's pretty straightforward. It doesn't work, right? So in order to get the animation to work, you have to set the animation before you actually add it. So dealing with things like this is why dealing with fragment transactions is just a big pain in the butt. I don't like dealing with it. When I initially looked into this, I'm not a fan of fragments, but hopefully you'll see that maybe this will change your mind. Maybe the navigation framework will change your mind. So that's good. All right, so we talked about two of those pain points. So here are some more pain points that you may experience. So when you're dealing with fragments, you have to manage your own backstack, the up and back button behavior. You have to manage that. It's kind of I think it's kind of a failure of the API that you have to manage that yourself. Managing deep links is not scalable, because if you go and you change your scheme or something like that, you have to go and change different bits of where you parse your deep link, where you set your scheme and things like that in Android manifest. So that's not scalable. Passing arguments is not type safe. If you want to pass an argument, you pass in some string and you just hopefully you cast it to the right type. That's not great, right? So these are some of the things that the navigation framework aims to solve. And so what does the navigation framework provide? First, it provides a declarative approach to defining your navigational structure in the app. Now it manages the backstack for you, so you don't have to do that yourself. It reduces boilerplate code. It simplifies creating fragment animations immensely, so you'll see that in the demos. It also removes the need to write fragment transactions, right? So we saw the stack trace at the beginning. Hopefully with the navigation framework, we don't have to see that again because we don't have to write our own fragment transactions. That stuff is just handled for us automatically. It also adds a type-safe way to provide arguments to your fragment. So now you don't have to do any messy casting or anything like that. It's all handled for you. So before we dive into the code, I want to go through quickly just some the different bits that make up the navigation framework. So first, you have your graph and your nested graphs. A graph and a nested graph is simply just an XML file that defines your navigational structure of your graph. Then you have your nav host. And you can think of your nav host as just your container, which will manage the swapping in and out of fragments. And so you can actually implement your own nav host, but the framework provides one for you, the nav host framework, or the nav host fragment. Then you have destinations. And a destination can be a fragment, an activity, another nested graph, or even just recently, I think they announced that you can create your own custom destinations. So hopefully, maybe in the future, someone will create another framework where you use the navigation graph or a navigation framework, but with custom views instead of fragments. Maybe that'll be the best of both worlds. And then finally, you have actions. And so you can think of an action as something that connects destinations to each other, and this is where you can define behaviors for that destination. So if you want to define different pop enter behavior, exit behaviors, animations, things like that, that's where you can define those in your actions. All right, so let's look at some code. Actually, I'll show you what we're going to build first. So hopefully everyone can see this. So I created a super fancy app, my version of Blockbuster, minus the E. All right, so you can see here we have two buttons. We have a login and we have a browse button. So if you click login, this takes us to a login screen, but behind the scenes, this is actually a nested graph that we're entering. And then from here, you have your forgot password. So imagine if you're building something, if you're building an app where you have a certain flow that you want the user to flow through, you can create nested graphs for that. So like a login flow, a wizard, new user flows, tutorials, things like that. That's where you can use a nested graph. Or those are actually good examples of using nested graph. Then if we click back, you can see we have a browse screen and we have some pretty awesome movies that some of them are my favorites. You can decide which ones. But here is just a simple list of movies, their descriptions, and if I click on one, we can see that movie is shared to the next screen. And this is all done through using the navigation framework, and is really, really easy to do. So this is what we want to build, but let's start from the beginning. All right, so this here is the navigation graph. If we look here, make this bigger, close that. How does that look? All right. You can see here we have a few different destinations right off the bat. We have this welcome fragment, we have a browse fragment, we have a movie detail fragment. And then we have this nested graph over here, and that's the login flow that I just mentioned. So if you double click on the nested graph, you see that now we have two new fragments. We have a login fragment and a forgot password fragment. So let's show how we can actually just add a destination. So to do this, you would click your button here and create new destination. And actually, I want to show you one thing before I do that. So you remember earlier when I said that a nav host is just a container that swaps in and out fragments? It's like a switchboard. This here is the main activities layout, and in here I've defined one fragment, and the fragment that we're actually using the nav host fragment from the navigation framework API. So once you do that, you have to then define your nav graph, and then you tell it that this is the default nav host for this activity. So let's go back into the nav graph. Let's create a new fragment. So let's call it fragment 1. So you can see here by just doing that, what it's done, it's actually created a fragment class as well as this layout file. So at this point, it's not really linked up to anything. If I wanted to add a destination to it, I could go and just drag the this little handle here to that fragment, and that creates an action. So now I have an action going from the welcome fragment to this new fragment 1. Now if we were to look at the main activity, and let's just start enabling some of the code, because right now if we run this, nothing is hooked up. Right? So I disabled all that. So let's go and start re-enabling some of these actions and destinations and walk through how all this stuff works. So the first one, so this is a Kotlin file. I wouldn't recommend to write your stuff like this, but for the sake of the demo, I put everything in one file because Kotlin allows me to do that, and it's awesome. So here we have the main activity, and the main activity again is it just defines one fragment inside of it. So we have our welcome fragment, which when you create your destinations, the navigation framework or the actual editor will create a file for you, the fragment class. I just copied all those classes into here. So we have our welcome fragment, and right now it's not hooked up to anything, but let's step through each piece and see what it actually does. So this is something we're all familiar with. On create view, we're actually just inflating the view for the fragment, for the welcome fragment, and in here is where the fun stuff starts. This code right here, this will actually find the view, so the login button, right? So we're going to add a click listener to the login button, and then we're going to call this navigation.find nav controller, not the best name, but you have to get a reference to the navigation controller, and then you can call this method here navigate, right? So the navigate accepts an action, so you can pass you can pass an action here as an action or an ID. So if I go back to Nav Graph, let's look at so let's just delete that for a second. All right, so let's open up attributes. Okay. All right. So we can see here I selected this arrow, and it's welcome to returning user flow. So that's the name of the ID, and I define that. So whenever you drag or create an action, it'll actually create an ID for you. You can just overwrite that with your own. This is also where you can set animations, default arguments that you want to pass, pop behavior, launch options, things like that, and we'll go through those. But this is really handy, and this is what I typically use to play around with this and to use it. You can just easily just create your destinations and all your animations and stuff like that.
One quick question.
Yep.
The types, are they always action or are there other types?
Types are always action.
Okay.
Yep. So we have the action here, welcome to returning user flow. So now when I click the login button, it'll actually take me to that destination because now I'm telling it to navigate to it when I click the button. All right, the next one is pretty much the same. There's a browse button. We're saying when you click on the browse button, I want you to take me to the browse fragment using the welcome to browse action ID. All right, so let's run this. All right, so before when I click these buttons, nothing really happened, so let's click on them now. So now when I click on the login button, I'm taken to the login fragment, right? And so now I'm in that nested graph flow. So looking at that, the nested graph, you can see, let me maximize this. Does everyone see like the little house on top? You see that? Does that come through? That's actually telling whoever starts this nested graph is telling you what the start destination should be, right? So you can actually change that. You can go here and right click and say set as start destination, and then forgot password will be the new start destination. But for us, we want it to be the login fragment. All right, so that was pretty simple. Let's look at another one. Let's look at forgot password. Again, this one is just setting, like we've seen before, you set the, you get a reference to the button, and then you call navigate using whatever action you want to navigate to. All right, so let's go back to the app, and let's click on browse. All right. So browse, let's see, nope, okay. So browse, it takes me to browse, but when I click on the movie item, nothing happens in this case. So let's look at this code. So this one is a little interesting. The docs online weren't really that helpful to do this with shared elements, so this is if you ever want to do this, I think this will be pretty helpful. So again, what we want to accomplish is if I click on this movie item, I want to share the poster image to the next fragment and then pass the text of the movie, the description text, to the next fragment. So to do that, you have to do a couple things. So first, you have to get a handle to the Fragment Navigator Extras builder. Again, a terrible name. But you get a handle to that, and then what you can do from there, you can use the method on builder to add a shared element, which is what we're doing here. We're saying, I want to add the image view as my shared element, and then provide the transition name. So when you're doing this is very similar to what you've done before with shared elements. You still have to provide a transition name in your XML layout, but this actually makes it so you can actually use the navigation framework and share elements. So I've already done that. I've already set the image transition, the transition name on the layout, and get a handle to the view, pass that in there as well, and then you call build. This is where it actually builds the extras for you. And then here, what I'm doing here is I want to get the movie's description. I want to pass it to the next fragment, but I want to do that in a type-safe way. So the navigation framework provides a safe args Gradle plugin. So anytime you add an argument to your destination, it'll create these classes for you. So let's take a look at the main graph again, and let's show you how that's done. So if I click on the destination, right, you can see here that now I have this argument here, movie description, which I've already added. So I can add another one. I can add this one like foo. I can give it a type. I'll give it an integer, and then I'll click add. So now I have two arguments. So this destination now accepts two arguments, but I'm only going to pass it one. So if we look here again, actually let me get rid of that, and I'll make it nullable actually, so that I don't have to set it. Oops, make it a string, nullable. All right, so now I have the string, it's nullable, I don't have to set it, and then I have movie description. So the movie description will actually be used by the movie detail fragment to display the text, or to get the text and to display it in the fragment. Everyone with me so far? Good, okay, cool. So here so since I've created the argument, there's the two classes that are created. So there's a directions class and there's an args class. The directions class is usually whatever the name of your fragment is plus suffix with the directions. That is the class that you'll use to build your action and provide it with whatever arguments that you set in the XML. And then there's an args class. That's the class that you use to parse the bundle on the receiving side. So I say browse to movie detail. This was already provided for me. I provided the description. I pulled the description from the text above right here. And then I call navigation.find nav controller, navigate, passing my action, as well as passing it the extras that were built up here. All right, so let's see what happens. I guess I do have to pass it. Okay. So go to browse again, click on that, and nothing's happening still, right? So I actually spent a lot of time trying to figure out why this was not working correctly when I was working on this. So the key to this is you have to actually set your shared element transition. So once you set your shared element transition on your fragment, that's no different than what we've already done before. Without using a navigation framework, things should work. So cool. So now we see the posters being shared to the next fragment. That was pretty simple, not too bad. But we don't see any text here. So let's go and let's uncomment some more code. All right. So remember that args class I was telling you about? So this one, another terrible name, it takes your fragment and it substitutes it with args. So now I have movie detail fragment args, and I can use that to parse the information from the bundle that's passed to it from the previous destination. So, so here I'm just setting the text on my movie description text view, and I'm using movie fragment args from bundle, provided the view, and then set movie description, or grab movie description. Let's go to browse. Nice. So now we're actually grabbing the text from the previous destination. We're doing it in a type-safe manner. If you want to do this, you actually have to go to and okay. So you have to add this to your project's build file, Gradle file. You have to add the Safe Args plugin, and once you do that, you then have to apply the plugin in your app's Gradle file. So once you do that, then you actually can take advantage of using these args classes and direction classes. So actually, let's look at some animations. Let's see how we can add custom animations. Because before, remember the example where it was really kind of like obscure, like how to set an animation. And if you put it in, over one line, it doesn't work. You put it under a line, it does work. You don't have to worry about any of that stuff with this. So let's go into our nested graph and let's click on the action. So for this action, we don't have any animations defined for it. So what I did is, and I'm going to actually exit presentation mode for a second. So I just copied a bunch of animations I had from another project, which I probably copied from somewhere else. But here are a ton of different animations. You just define these animations and you pop them into your NIM directory, and then that way they'll surface in the editor for you. So that's where you'll see where these animations are coming from. So let me go in here. I'll click on the action. And then let's change the animation to bounce. Start that. So all right, so again, I'm in the nested graph. I added an animation to the login to forgot password action. So if I go on login, if I click forgot password, I should see it bounce, right? Much simpler than before. It's so simple now to add animations. I can do a flip. I mean, you all get the idea. You can do a bunch of different things in here. Let's just see what flips looks like. Oh, okay. Cool.
And those are just standard XML animations.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah. So if we look at the, I can show you the, what was it, flip? Yeah, that's the animation right there for flip, right? So it's actually pretty cool. And again, you can now define custom destinations. You just have to implement the nav host interface, and you may have to do a few other things. I didn't look into that, but I just know it is possible if you all want to do that. If maybe you don't want to deal with fragments, that is a possibility. So let's actually look at the nav graph and see what it looks like. So up to this point, we've looked at the graphical editor. You can do a lot with it. You can actually write this stuff by hand if you want to. And this is what the nav graph looks like. It's pretty straightforward. You have your navigation object here. You have your start. You set your start destination. In our case, the start destination is welcome fragment. In the welcome fragment, you have two actions that are defined: the welcome to returning user flow, as well as the welcome to browse. So remember, we're going to the returning user flow nested graph, or just going to the browse fragment. If you scroll down, this is where the nested graph is defined. It's actually just another navigation object defined within the parent one. And again, you have your fragment, an action for forgot password, the animation. This is where the animation is set. Your destination, and lastly, the other one is the last one is how arguments are actually passed to the destination. So you can see here that the movie detail fragment, it accepts an argument, and you define the type. Now you can't use every type in the world. At least I don't believe you can. Let me double check. I believe it's only a few defined types. Okay, so parsable, a resource reference, or just your normal, integer long Boolean string. Those are the types that it supports for argument types. Another thing you can do with the navigation framework, you can actually deep link into an actual destination. So you can see here, I can provide a deep link. I can put in, whatever URI I want, foo, whatever, right? Like some URI. You can actually have it auto-verify, so you can have Google verify if you are who you say you are, and you can actually accept this URI. That's done for you there with the checkbox. If you do that, though, you will have to add in, I believe it is, you have to add in, I forget what it was, but I believe it's like, I think it's a deep link object you add into your activity here. And at build time, the navigation framework will take that and actually build the necessary intent filters for you, so you don't have to do that yourself. So it actually simplifies that a bit, so you don't have to manage, how your deep links are set in your Android manifest, as well as manage how you're parsing those. The navigation framework will take care of that for you. Any questions so far?
Does that include query parameters on the deep links?
Yeah, so like it'll just be whatever URI, so whatever link, and then you can parse that, or it'll parse that for you.
Okay, cool.
There's also the notion of global actions. So imagine if you want to create one action but share it with multiple destinations. That's another possibility that you can do. All right. So this brings me back to the original question. So is this stuff really useful? Is it useful to me? I think it's actually incredibly useful. Before I started looking into this, like I said, I wasn't the biggest fan of fragments, but the things that they're adding to this, they're actually making it like pretty useful, where you can spin up an app like that sample app with the shared element transitions and all the different things that it was doing. It didn't take long at all. I mean, it took less than an hour to do that. Before, it would have taken a lot longer. You would have had to manage your fragment transactions, make sure that you're actually committing those at certain times, and other times you're not. And I think it just makes it a little bit more pleasant experience, building fragments and animating between different destinations. So what do you all think? Do you think that's actually a better choice than actually handwriting fragment transactions? So, I mean, I think it is. So yeah, so hopefully that was pretty useful to you all if you haven't looked into the navigation framework. I have a couple links up there for the slides as well as the GitHub repo for the project, for the sample. And with that, thank you. If you have any questions, feel free, yeah?
So it's alpha now? Is that right? And what?
I believe it is alpha, yeah.
Your opinion on when this will be ready for production, or like how to think about that?
I don't know if it's ready for production. I think there's still some things that you can't do. Like you can do very basic animations, you can do shared elements, but if you want to get into anything complex, you may have to handwrite that yourself. It may be worth it to just wait a little bit, or you can use it and just write those on your own. But I really don't use any alpha versions of anything until they're well vetted. And this isn't, to me, this navigation framework isn't well vetted yet. It's really useful. It's good for demo purposes and writing sample apps and small apps, but I wouldn't want to throw this in a Salesforce app. Yep.
Your example just had like a static toolbar. If you were hoping to like update the title or options menu, do you know if it's recommended for the fragments to manage that, or is there ways to hook it? Like what fragment?
Yeah, so I don't think the navigation framework has an opinion on that. I think it just goes back to just the standard conventions for that. I don't feel bad about accessing the toolbar from a fragment, or maybe you have some callback to just notify the activity, hey, update your toolbar or update the menus, something like that.
So I noticed when you were adding new fragments into the graph that it was typically a new fragment that you were adding, and that layout then translated into the graph XML. Does the utility also allow you to import like an existing fragment, or is this more optimized to just like make layouts from scratch?
I think it does. Let's check it out. Let's see. So do we have, yep, forgot password 1, it's right there. So here, let me, I think I was already in there. Doesn't make it any bigger, but yeah, so it is there, so it does.
So it seems like that's the first time you experimented with that. Further question would be if you knew, like, so I've already defined this fragment, it already has its layout XML, would it include that other layout in the main graph here?
I would think so. Yeah, I mean, it looks like it's scrubbing through the directory and finding all the different fragments, so I would think it would find that layout.
Cool.
Yep.
Do you know any plans for like Nav host and the constraint layout, to navigate into different constraints inside of it?
I believe you can probably create your own. I think this just subscribe to some contractor interface, the Nav host. Let's take a look and see.
Right. You can go and switch different constraints. I mean, deep linking into different constraints.
I mean, that's the Nav host interface right there, right? I mean, you can probably write your own to swap those out and have it be based on a constraint layout instead of a fragment. Yep.
So it seemed like there's two options for passing stuff into a new fragment. There's the extras and the arguments. I guess I'm still kind of confused, like when to use which.
Yeah, so the arguments is when you want to pass data like you would normally, like passing some text or some value from somewhere to that fragment. The extras is for the shared element.
Okay.
So that's the name of it. It's a terrible name again, but it's for the shared element.
Okay.
Yep. So it's just like when you create the normally with shared element you have your activity options, and then you have to create the extras like that bundle to pass to start the activity with that bundle for the shared element. It's the same thing. It's just a different API building it for you and doing all this stuff behind the scenes.
Can you expand on the, I guess, control and handling for the backstack, using the nav host? Because right now, if I tell it to directly go to a fragment, it handles everything. But then if I want to go to a specific fragment, clear the stack on top of that.
Yep. So you can see here, if I click on this action, you can define where you want to pop to, like if you were to pop. So if I'm on the movie detail fragment and I click back, I can tell it just to go right back to the browse, or I'm sorry, to the welcome fragment. So you can define all that. You can define if you want it to be single top or not. I'm not sure if you have any other options other than single top launch options, but you can tell it how you want it to go back. So it's pretty awesome in that respect. Yeah. Any other questions? Once, twice? All right. Thank you, everyone.